Okay.
I'm like trying not to breathe, but okay.
Yeah, hold your breath. Apnea.
Now it's jazz. The place is roaring. All beautiful girls in there. One mad brunette at the bar, drunk with her boys. One strange chick I remember from somewhere wearing a simple skirt with pockets. Her hands in there. Short haircut, slouched, talking to everybody. Up and down the stairs they come. The bartenders are the regular band of Jack and the heavenly drummer who looks up in the sky with blue eyes, with a beard. He's wailing beer caps of bottles and jamming at the cash register, and everything is going to the beat. It's the beat generation. It's Bayat. It's the beat to keep. It's the beat of the heart. It's being beat and down in the world, and like old-time low-down. And like in ancient civilizations, the slave boatmen rowing galleys to a beat, and servants spinning pottery to a beat.
Hello and welcome to the Innocents Abroad podcast. That is the 21st of June in the year of our Lord, 2018. I am one of your hosts, Yael Osowski, coming to you from Vienna, Austria.
And from a late afternoon in Warsaw, a sunny day, Todor, what's up?
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Innocents Abroad podcast once more, a podcast on life and society abroad. We are number one in the iTunes store in no category. So we're doing really well, Todor. This is amazing.
Yeah, man, dream come true. That's exactly what I wanted to do with this podcast. Just
exactly.
say,
exactly.
We're not going to be anywhere.
So if you want to continue listening to some of our other conversations, you can definitely go to the website, theinnocentsabroad.com. You'll find all the archived conversations and podcasts that we have had, a few dozen or so. Been quite an interesting journey, always in different places, different topics. And now we have a good topic to talk about here. There's one that we as lovers of culture and literature have always been kind of interested in. And Todor actually came up with this idea, so I'll throw the opener to him, and he can do our nice segue.
Woohoo! Well, I'm going to start reading Jack Kerouac, who's a very, very interesting character.
God, you're 60 years late.
Yeah, only. But I don't know if there's like a revival of this Beat Generation stuff or not, but I'm just finishing up The Hell's Angels by Hunter S. Thompson, and that's sort of more or less the same generation of writers, and they had an interesting approach to literature and their art. And I came across an article, I think we'll share it in the show notes, that talks a little bit about the journey of Jack Kerouac and his road to writing on the road. And yeah, I thought that the whole Beat Generation thing, as they called it, he hated being called the advocate of this whole generation, but essentially this Beat generation was a term I think first used by Kerouac, or at least credited to him. By I think Burroughs, and I think it's interesting to compare that generation to what's currently happening. There's a couple of snippets from the article that I've highlighted, but essentially what I really want to discuss here is the fact that Holmes, who wrote about Kerouac, wasn't referring to a movement when he talked about the Beat Generation. So there was no movement. It has nothing to do with music or anything like that. He was referring to that Cold War generation, people disillusioned by the war, the bomb, the kind of standard narrative at the time, and we're really trying to question how life should be lived. And one of the things that this Louis Menand in this article talks about is the car. And the car, for me, is an interesting parable to the phone today. And basically, if you read on the road, or if you read into on the road, the car is essentially the place to be, but nobody wants to be in the car. So nothing happens in the car, but everyone wants to go somewhere. So they all want to go. Basically, that whole trip is going to Denver, going to San Francisco, going to New York. So being in all these places, the jazz generation. So they do drive a lot. They spend a lot of time in the car. They don't like it. They don't want to be in the car. But there's a constant need to be somewhere else and to be somewhere where something is happening. And then once they get there, they realize they just have to go somewhere else. And I think, we've talked about this a lot, social media and the phone and stuff, but I think it's a very, very interesting point today to talk about. I'm not going to say the word, but this kind of new up-and-coming generation of people who grow up with the phone basically wanting to be somewhere else or wanting to do something else. This, fear of missing out and just not being settled in their own place and not really ever finding a place to settle. Although it seems that everyone is on a permanent quest to find some kind of place where, they feel at home or they feel comfortable. And that's very interesting for the Beat generation. Then they're all, the Beat generation is as they say, it has nothing to do with music. It's it names the condition of being beaten down, poor, exhausted, at the bottom of the world.
But also, Kerouac was a big proponent of making it much more positive as well, like you're upbeat as well.
Yeah, for sure. But the idea of that generation is that they became kind of lost. So it's post World War II generation, the early baby boomers who did not fit the narrative of like a 9-to-5, a house with a lawn, 2 kids and a dog. I suppose they wanted to take on a different approach to life and really living life and exploring what that is. Meanwhile, creating almost an interesting new literary genre with this kind of journalistic approach to novels, where they write about their own experiences very, very directly. So there are no metaphors there. They're just basically talking about their own experience, like through a certain, like almost like diary-like narrative. I'm still to read On the Road, though.
Well, I
read
did,
it, right?
Yeah, I did read On the Road. A big fan of Jack Kerouac, who is a French-Canadian by family.
Shout out to all the French Canadians.
Of course, yeah. He's originally from Lowell, Massachusetts, which I actually tried to visit when we were in Boston. I think it's only about an hour and a half outside of Boston. Tried to visit the town. I thought it'd be super cool just because it does feature in a lot of his other writings. And I actually just purchased, I haven't gone through it yet, but one of his new French books that has been put together from some of his French writings. He wrote like basically in the Joual French, which is pretty much how I write. I am not writing like a Parisian guy, but the book is called La Vie d'Hommage, so it's like a life of homage. Pretty cool stuff. I've read some of his other kind of French essays, and it's super interesting. He's a guy who is very far removed from Quebec and life in French Canada, but still spoke French at home with his family, which is kind of like my own background. That's really cool. And On the Road, you don't really have that. You do have this kind of basically forever hitchhiking that they do. And all these adventures and groups of kids. You don't want it to be the kind of Sharks versus Jets as in West Side Story, but it's around the same time. You're talking in the 50s, late 40s, hopping in between these cities, seeing what's going on, as you said, in Denver or in San Francisco. The romanticism of being on the road and being free and being able to travel and experience all of this. There's a lot of drugs that go into it. There's a lot of just like weird, horny sex that goes into it. There's a lot of that. And I actually see, if we can continue on the theme of the Beat generation in the new era, I think there's even a connection that you can see in some of the essays of the other writers of the beatniks of the Beat generation to the transcendentalist, like Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Walt Whitman. Henry David Thoreau is like probably one of my favorite authors. Just having a lot of...
I've never actually read anything. I just know of his secluded lifestyle on that farm, but
in Walden Pond. All you need to do is read On the Duty of Civil Disobedience. It was actually a huge influence for Martin Luther King Jr. and basically what pushed me into the realm of questioning government and more towards kind of classical liberalism. So it was my main influence. And there's like traces of that, I think, in the Beat generation and in Jack Kerouac. It's this kind of being skeptical of big institutions and military, and there's always this kind of reluctance to engage in these huge systems because all of those things represent conformity and represent the man, and this is like a way of going away from the man.
Oh yeah, for sure. What's really interesting for me, I watched like on the firing line with Buckley. I think this is his last television appearance for Kerouac.
Oh, is this when he was hammered?
Yeah, and he was totally hammered, just completely. And I actually also watched Ginsberg comment on that, saying that essentially Kerouac felt almost ambushed and was actually looking for an intellectual conversation with Buckley, not perhaps on the Beat Generation, but more about American society in general. But he was basically put together on the show on the panel with like a New Age hippie. I mean, at the time, who kind of Kerouac didn't really like want to be associated with, and some sociology professor, I think, who was basically analyzing Kerouac on the show and the whole Beat Generation approach, which was weird, it was really funny. I think we can add that also to the show notes. I think this is incredibly worthwhile watching, primarily because Buckley probably for the first time is not in control of his own show, but rather Kerouac is, because he completely hijacks that.
That's cool. That's the way to do it. And another note, obviously, he was like a super heavy drinker, and ultimately, I believe that's what killed him.
Yeah, he died of some like abdominal hemorrhaging or something.
And if I can make it personal again, he died in the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, where I actually lived for about a year and a half.
Oh, buddy, we're going to have to do an actual road trip through the U.S. where we visit all these sites.
Well, you've done your own kind of road trip. You've done your own kind of Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing, Las Vegas road trip that I have not yet done. So you have that at least on your resume. I don't have this yet.
I don't think that was a really literary experience, driving from Vegas to Denver in the middle of winter. But it's certainly an interesting one.
Yeah, it's all about survival.
It's all about being on the road and hating the fact that you're in the car and just wanting to get there.
Just wanting to get out.
To get there.
I think I do like.
It's funny that you mentioned this because I mean there was also a lot of drugs along the way.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you just found them at the various exits and spots. I want to go to the phone though. I think that's kind of interesting. I mean, I've ventured in and out on this question. Obviously you and I deal with work in our kind of day-to-day life where we need to have our cell phones or smartphones. You got to be plugged in all the time. Got to have everything, all the notifications, ding, 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 dang, 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 bing, bing, bing. We got to have everything connected all the time.
Immediately up to speed.
Yeah, I did purchase myself a nice little Nokia normal dumb phone off the grid. So I've been using that a little bit. It's cool because it has dual SIM, so I can put in my American and my Austrian card. And I'm trying to graduate to the point that, at least on weekends, I can just slip my chips in there. If somebody wants to send a text or call me, they can do that on either number, but I won't have access to email or Facebook. Good God, thanks. Online stuff. We've talked enough about trying to limit this kind of thing and how social media is ruining all of our lives, very clearly. But hey, it's one step in that direction. And I got to go hiking last weekend and tried to be off the grid as much as possible. It's hard. And I'm sure that's something that they would have been rapping on people for in Beat Generation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think really it's interesting to consider the phone as a kind of vehicle, primarily because we're not so dependent on physical spaces anymore, but rather on virtual spaces. And these social media platforms present some kind of segmented chambers where we, talk and exchange ideas, which wasn't really the case. I mean, they really wanted to be somewhere, right? They needed to be in a jazz joint, in a bar, and to play together a Chet Baker record or whatever, and see something, experience something that way, because there was no alternative. And I think we're moving closer and closer to having such virtual spaces where we actually are able to immerse ourselves in that experience. I mean, just think about Snapchat. It's quite close to seeing what's actually happening. So being present there, following the right people, being up to speed, not missing anything. Everything is changing fast. All the snaps disappear. You have to be there in that moment.
Oh, the craziest thing about Snapchat that I just noticed is you do the live feature where you kind of click on the live map, and you can see the Snapchats that are being sent from certain locations, and you can see the hotspots. Have you done this?
No, I don't.
Holy,
I don't use Snapchat.
it is insane because at any moment you can click where there are a lot of Snapchat stories and you're basically just plugged into whatever Snapchat stories. So you can see people celebrating the World Cup victory in some German town, or you see people protesting in Brazil. It's super strange, and then after a while I just had to put it down because it was just too surreal, I think.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I mean when I say, let's compare this to the Beat Generation, and why this is happening really. Like what has made an entire generation want to do this? What makes them so unhappy or dissatisfied with their whatever current space that they actually really feel the need to be somewhere else. Meanwhile, it's that trip, that road, that like the need to be somewhere rather than being somewhere. I don't think anyone's really happy at that ultimate destination, but rather constantly taking trips and moving is the kind of key segment here. And I think it's really, really interesting to compare those two. There's definitely solid differences between these generations themselves, particularly because I think millennials probably have a lot more opportunity and they're not so beat down. I think there's a sentiment of being beat down for sure.
One thing I think that's interesting as well with Kerouac, especially in how he wrote, is that it was super deliberate and purposeful. Like he started writing the book before he took any of the trips, and he was taking the trips while he's like jotting all these notes down and doing all these weird experiences. It's still so similar to this damn movie with Greg Kinnear. Hold on, I have to look it up. Movie.
We can hear you typing like
I know. So there's this movie with Greg Kinnear called Stuck in Love, 2012. And it's about like a writer and his family. There's like his ex-wife and his teenage girl, and everyone's just a damn writer in the family. And the whole movie is just about living in the moment and these kind of experiences. And he's like coaching them on how to live in the moment. It's like it's a super good movie. I don't know why it doesn't have higher ratings. But it's very, I don't know why I keep coming back to this damn movie. I've probably mentioned it 3 times on the podcast, I think.
Well, I guess I have to see it now, huh?
Yeah, it has Lily Collins in it, so you definitely want to watch it. And Jennifer Connelly. It's good.
I have no idea who those people are.
American celebrities. Yeah, but very, very good kind of book. I mean, and this is the kind of stuff that, we're obviously very attracted to. I think there's an element of that in a lot of the writing that I've done. I wish I could do a lot more of this. I think maybe it's the same with you. Most of the time when I am traveling and having experiences, I just get way too damn caught up.
Well, I think we can't afford to get as drunk as Kerouac used to get drunk.
Oh, no. I think obviously not. I'd be dead by 39 instead of 42 or whenever he died.
Yeah, obviously. But I think also it's important to note that, I mean, it took him like 10 years to write On the Road. I mean, he was working on it for a really long time. So I think that space, that's why I think it has this nostalgic undertones. As far as I've read, again, I'm dying to read the book. But apparently, the very, very famous one reel of paper that he glued together to write the book in one sitting. I mean, it didn't really come to him. He wasn't really some divine inspiration that made him actually write that. He had a ton of material that he was reworking all the time, and then he just decided to sit down, probably inspired by one of his compatriots here on that or basically some of the gang buddies in the car. And essentially that's why he kind of glued all that paper together, stuck it and wrote it on one giant reel, and then later cut it up and mixed it up to basically make a functional novel.
I think it was super also I think you're a big fan of Tom Waits, is that right?
Yeah.
So he is hugely influenced by Kerouac too. I think one with a lot of the writing that he's putting together and the style particularly, it's like just so authentic and real, and there's zero filter, and it's this different kind of style that, even reading it 60 years later, you're plugged into that. And you look around at your own life and what you're doing, and you're saying, hey, am I doing what It's actually terrible because that's one of the top Instagram hashtags ever, or whatever, like live authentically, right? But it's like how often are we doing this, and how often are we doing things that we are just expected to do, or everyone else thinks that we should be doing because that's kind of what you got to do. It's all about individualism, and how do you break away from that? And I think it's hard. I think I'm pretty susceptible to it. I try not to be, but I think we all kind of fall into that trap and in that pit somehow. I mean, it also depends on your friend groups as well.
I mean, just look at what Kerouac did. So he took a proactive approach to glue the pages together so that he wouldn't be interrupted by having to change the reel of paper, change the individual pages in his typewriter, so he could write continually and not be interrupted. I mean, it's a very distinctive intention there to not interrupt his work. Yeah. So I think today, if we want to do something like that, it also requires us to take an active approach to say that we need to focus and avoid interruptions. So
good God, that'd be hard.
Yeah, and that would be hard. Yeah, again, and I think separating the experience versus our take on the experience is almost, I mean, with the constant need to basically post, while something is happening, really prevents that kind of retrospective moment where you actually can look back on your experience and then, paste or post some judgment on it. You're kind of forced to, whatever, Instagram the meal you're having. Mm-hmm. You're not supposed to actually describe, the pleasure and enjoyment of the meal later. You're much rather kind of forced to sacrifice the moment so that you can, share it with others.
By the way, there's just as a promotion for the Innocence Abroad listeners, there is a new feature available on Instagram today. Or not sponsored, I promise. It basically is going to allow you to post videos up to 1 hour on Instagram stories. So it's going to be called IGTV, like Instagram TV. I just saw this like a second ago.
Wow, so, that's a total game changer.
This is a total game. Look, you need to invest now. No, short Facebook, short all these guys. Tank the companies.
It's likely to go down that road.
But you're right. People are telling the stories through these damn machines, and we've been in these situations where you meet up with friends or buddies, and you're doing that. It's like, hey man, I went here. It's like, yeah, I saw your stories. I know your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but that detracts from the story. So look at what Kerouac. So I mean, basically, he's a functional, at least in the early days, functional alcoholic. He goes on the road and he's all about experiencing life, right? So he's there trying to immerse himself and be everywhere, be where the beat is, right? So he's trying to just get to the jazz. And he has his friends. They're in the car. They're constantly in the rush. They're they want to get to all these places. But then it takes him 10 years to write the book, right? And he has to glue pages together, put it in a typewriter. So I mean, think of the amount of time that has taken for those sentiments to settle, and for him to actually create something that was so out of that current narrative that it basically started and pushed him out into the forefront of this whole beat generation, right? Yeah. So this book, I think Ginsberg's poem Howl and Kerouac's book were effectively like the icons of this movement, but generation. And it's interesting to note how today it's also very hard to take a step back and actually digest the experiences that you're having, just because we're being pushed into like constantly sharing the experiences that we're having. So we don't, you're asked to give your first impression of everything instead of actually allowing for that feeling to sit and boil down, and actually you're able to digest it and then give some kind of feedback on it, right?
So there's no time to analyze or to understand or to connect it to your own kind of motivation at all, because you're forced to kind of regurgitate it as quickly as possible and say, all right, what do you think?
Absolutely. So that's the kind of takeaway, the lesson in On the Road, or actually why I think we should take another closer look at the beat generation to see exactly what these experiences are, what life or what experiences did it give to them, to that Beat generation? Not maybe to Jack Kerouac personally, but generally what we can learn from that generation, because I think they're very similar to what today's kids, maybe you and I are a little bit older, like we're not born with the smartphone. So what today's kids are going to be experiencing, and I think the what car used to be and what phone is today are quite, like, I would go deeper into examining how really similar they are. Yeah,
we're living in an urban environment, so we don't use or drive in cars as much as people, let's say, out in the country or suburbs do. So maybe that's still true. I would love to have a car and and love to have those stories and be able to road trip again. I think I'm able to rent them now and try to have these experiences. I mean, we had that driving all the way out to Ukraine some years ago, and we'll take many more road trips across Europe. One time I will take the Mongolian car rally. Have you heard of this thing?
Yeah.
I want to do this. I think that would be the coolest experience ever. I think there's been 1 or 2 books written on kind of that experience and what it was like. But I think it's from London all the way to Mongolia, and then you donate the car at the end of the trip.
Okay.
And typically you buy some shitty car, you kind of fix it up a little bit, and then you're supposed to work on it and make it to Mongolia in the quickest amount of time possible. I mean, that's super long. What is that? Probably 3 weeks if you drive every day? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's quite like, it's like a desolate place, so there's quite a lot of just lonesome driving. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff that when I first started writing...
You don't need to do that, Yael. You can just take out your phone and just fucking follow someone from Mongolia on Snapchat.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Just be like, hey, man, just periscope that shit while you're driving through Mongolia, and I never have to experience that myself.
Yeah. Oh, and this is another thing that, a lot of what the social media is doing is it is inflating people's egos to the point that everyone has the belief that what they're doing at that moment is like the super coolest, most awesome, most enviable thing in the world. And with everyone doing that at all times and constantly firing that dopamine hit when they click the like or the share, I mean, that's terrible. What is that doing to our brains?
Yeah, it's making us pretty into dopamine, I think. Yeah.
If we could have dopamine in a pill form or preferably a vape form, maybe we could alleviate this problem.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's another good book we could read called The Brave New World, and there's a thing called Soma in there that basically does that.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah. I think these dopamine hits certainly make us more susceptible to these tools that we're using, make us slaves to them, I think. But yeah, it's interesting to see that even 60 years ago, people were also, were to take proactive approaches to change something, right? To readjust their position, to be upbeat instead of being beat down. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if there's any takeaways, that's essentially why I want to go into Kerouac and On the Road, just to see exactly.
And what are you reading? What are you reading now from Hunter S. Thompson?
The Hell's Angels.
Oh, that's Hell's Angels. That's right.
But that's really cool. That's basically a story on journalism. So it's quite interesting, his take on the what journalism is and what it should be.
His form of gonzo journalism.
Oh yeah, and then how typically dishonest journalism is, the sensationalism behind it that actually drives a lot of the stories.
I will say that the best gonzo journalists out there today, and a lot of people will not be happy to hear me say this, but
it's someone from Vice.
Actually, is Vice. There's like a great series where it's these like 2 chicks who are just writers who go and like work at some truck stop, strip club. Like total gonzo. They have zero experience. They're just like 2 chicks that are like, man, might as well do it. I don't know where they are, like Iowa or somewhere in Arizona or something. And they're just doing this, and there's all these like, guys with small teeth and bucktooth guys who drive the trucks who haven't touched a woman in 30 years that come out, and God, you just see their experience and their emotions. It's really good.
Wow, I don't know what to say to that.
The other gonzo journalist type was Matt Taibbi. He's an American journalist. He's done a lot of financial like Goldman Sachs analysis and kind of stuff. He actually used to be an expat himself. He lived in Russia for a couple years and was there, I think, right around the time of the fall of the wall and the fall of the Soviet Union. I think he wrote a book called The Exile, actually. It was about him writing stories and running from mobsters in Russia. I would recommend that. I haven't read it myself, but I've heard good things. And he has been one of my favorite writers. He's with, I think, Rolling Stone magazine.
Okay, well, there we go. We'll add him to the show notes.
Do you know any other gonzo journalists? Are there any good Serbian ones?
I can see that Google is suggesting Glenn Greenwald.
No, he's not a gonzo. No, he basically, I mean, he kind of does what I do. He just chills in a foreign country and comments on American stuff. Like he's living in Brazil with his boyfriend and his dogs. And he just writes about American policy and how everything sucks. Yeah, pretty much what I do.
Yeah, just let it out. Let it all out.
Yeah,
I'll just...
Yeah, I had this argument the other day on Twitter. I commented on something, I don't know, what I think it was like agricultural subsidies in the U.S., and I was just writing about it. Some guy's like, "You're not even American." And I said, "Well, of course I am, sir." He's like, "Well, you're not currently in America." Like, okay, buddy.
Yeah, you got to be eating that corn that gets subsidized in order to comment on it. Don't you know that?
Yeah, it's all the sugar, too. Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing that we use to our advantage. I mean, we're living in countries that are not our own, doing work that sometimes is based, anywhere. I know you've got stuff going on in Canada and all over Europe and the U.S. and stuff. Same for me, man. Same.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So how about we recap when we've actually read something new on the Beat Generation?
Yeah, that'd be good. I have not written or actually read any of these books soon, but I will. I've been reading some other books. I did. I'm almost done with Anthony Bourdain's book, by the way, which I think he's an extension of. Actually, he's a damn good gonzo journalist as well. Was.
Rest
in peace.
Yeah, shame. I did like him.
Yeah, his book is great. That's called Kitchen Confidential. I'd super recommend that to anyone. You don't have to be into cooking, but just into this kind of behind the scenes, what's happening, the dirty life, the awesome life, this kind of stuff. I think that's what makes Bourdain's writing really, really amazing. Yeah,
totally.
So
totally.
Yeah, we'll get back to that. And if any of you have any other recommendations, you can find our contact info on theinnocenceabroad.com. There's a little email button there to get in touch with us. Please do subscribe to the podcast as well on iTunes, Overcast, your favorite podcast listening device. We'll be on the SoundCloud. We've got plenty more to come, many great episodes to do, and great times ahead, Todor.
Yeah, man, we're climbing all the way to the top. Gonna be number 1 in all categories soon. What's up?
Yeah, boy. All right, Todor, pleasure, and look forward to talking to you soon, my man.
Likewise. Cheers to everybody.
Visit theinnocenceabroad.com.